Hello, everyone. This is Jill Aitoro with SC Media, and I am so pleased to have you join us for another video in our series for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which digs into specific pillars of cybersecurity, which were actually defined by CISO this year, and we're elaborating on those by digging in a little deeper and looking at how the people component should be considered in these various pillars. And today we are speaking about multi-factor authentication. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Mary McKee, the Deputy CISO for Duke University and the Director of Identity Management there. We are also joined by Shelly Epps, Senior Director of Cyber Risk Services and Program Management at Duke Health. Shelly and I were lucky enough to connect in person. How crazy is that, at InfoSec World recently? So I'm so glad to be speaking again to her and to have Mary with us. So thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. So I'm excited to talk to you because the healthcare sector, needless to say, has particular challenges across cybersecurity, but certainly when you figure authentication and identity and access, there's a lot of complications there. So I want to first set the stage by looking at the risks. We have health records that are and management and security of those that are constant concern. Mobile devices is always a distinctive concern in healthcare. So from you both, how would you describe that risk when it comes to authentication in healthcare? What is distinctive about it for this market?
So I think I'll start, if that's okay with you, Mary. I would say, I think one of the biggest differentiators is the fact that healthcare is a target. It's clearly a massive target for attack, and we see that in the day-to-day in our jobs and in our world. And I'm not saying that other industries are not also under attack, but we see it. And the particular balance in organizations like ours, where you're doing healthcare, but also partnering on the same network with academics, where you're hitting that challenge of a very high regulatory bar and also a need for a very high freedom of expression and personal agency from our faculty, it gets tricky. It allows for avenues of attack, and you have to be particularly thoughtful that not only are you protecting extremely sensitive data, but you're also working in an environment where you're trying to be as facile and engaged as free as you can for the academics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary, I also was thinking and kind of mentioned this in the beginning, and Shelly made reference to it, but there's different pools of users. Certainly for Duke, to that point, there's academic, internal, there's students from that perspective. There's patients, there's healthcare providers. How are the needs of those managed differently to ensure that they are empowered to share information they need and access information they need without sacrificing security along the way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, we've talked a lot about sort of the needs of, being able to use mobile devices to access healthcare records, things like all the different kinds. I think probably the major difference that we would see, Shelly and I, is kind of the difference between people that are internal to the, institutional enterprise versus patients who are receiving care. They all need access to some common systems, but there are, different ways to handle those constituencies. One thing that I think is particularly interesting about healthcare, like Shelly said, there is both, healthcare is particularly targeted and the stakes are particularly high. This is a situation where lives can be on the line. If systems are compromised, we have to take that extremely seriously. And it's very difficult to protect because more so in healthcare than other sectors, you see a rounding behavior where people have to go into a room, log into a workstation, leave the room, someone else comes in, has to log into that same workstation. And that makes it very difficult because one of the things that we've seen in general is protecting systems that are tied one-to-one to a user makes it easier for us to detect anomalous behavior. But when you need to make it very available for people to log into clinical workstations, that is something that really makes it more complicated.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
would say as well, you have to factor in that we have intentional turnover of staff that's occurring at an accelerated rate from other industries. There are constant new people coming in and leaving. And so training and managing human behaviors in that environment is a challenge because every year there is an entire new cohort walking through the door.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. You know, we hear a lot too also about the challenge of legacy technology. I don't know, and I probably am underestimating the rationale, but when you talk about the circumstances of the one-to-one device versus a terminal login, is that a legacy system problem, or is there other reasons why it is set up that way? As simple as not being able to do your job harnessed to a device, I imagine, is also a factor, but kind of what's the rationale behind that?
It's efficiency. It's
Okay.
efficiency at scale. If you have these devices that can stay static, but that people can move through more quickly, particularly in the clinical setting, I think that's what you're looking at there. I'm not sure it's legacy so much as intentional efficiency, but managing those machines is not without challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. So we are here to talk about multi-factor authentication. So considering some of the risks that are particular to the market you both work within, you know, how is it being handled now? You know, is it widely and successfully implemented, or, you know, does it depend on which pool of user that we are talking about? Like we just said, you know, how widespread are we seeing this right now?
I think that we have good coverage at Duke, and the key to that good coverage is really having flexibility. So one of the things when we talk about multi-factor authentication, we really urge people to think about that as the combination of multiple methods for authentication. It's not just the second factor, it's not just the push to your phone or the email, it is the combination. The reason why that's important is we have found definitively at Duke that the weakest of all the factors that we implement is passwords. It's the most exploited. It is the hardest to protect. It is the most, you know, we're living on borrowed time, if we can even say that at this point, with password security. They're pervasive, going back to your point about, you know, sort of legacy things. It's hard to replace passwords. But passwords really are the weakest link when it comes to our multi-factor authentication system. So we've found that in order to support a diverse community, we really need to offer different ways to, you know, whether it be device-based verification, you know, email account-based verification for internal systems, things that are this specific IP talking to this specific IP, in addition to some other sort of credential. We've had to be flexible in order to get the level of coverage that we have. One size fits all just isn't gonna allow you to get the kind of coverage we need.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, going back to your question too, Jill, are there different pools? Yes, but we consider literally anything that authenticates to our network one pool, and we hold a cohesive standard. If you're going to authenticate to the network, if you're going to authenticate to enterprise systems, you're going to have to use multi-factor authentication and something modern. Our patients are a different pool of people, and we leave it to their choices whether they configure multi-factor authentication on some of those enterprise systems, so they can connect to their health record and they can make the choice whether they want to employ multi-factor or not. But our staff, our students, our faculty, any of the contractors or consultants that are on our network, it's not a choice. Multi-factor is a clear and necessary element of your defense in depth stack around protecting your network and your systems.
You bring up a good point, though, because any market really that is relying or serving a client of sorts, in this case, a patient, you do need to leave some of the responsibility in their hands, the choice in their hands. And I imagine you have to fill in the gaps that are left in the choices that they make. So, you know, that can be a challenge. And that is a little bit what we're talking about is, you know, reading the actions of the people and ensuring that, you know, security is managed to offset any risk that might emerge in that. So, is there on your end, when the patient is opting to not take those extra steps, what is the responsibility or the role of Duke to ensure that security compromises don't result from something like that?
I think it's our responsibility to offer it and to make it as seamless and easy for the patient to use, and to make it very transparent and in time with regards to their existing authentication, that is capable and not difficult. And then, again, we have to allow them to choose that and to decide for themselves whether that is something that they will enable on their account. That's very, very different from our workforce and our students and our staff and the others. And realistically, a patient has access to their medical record, whereas anybody that works or has access to our network in a authenticated enterprise level role has access to more than just their individual record. And so that's where I think that differentiating line is between choice and requirement.
Yeah, that makes sense. You all have a couple programs I actually want to dig into, and one of them sort of ties into what you were just saying, Shelly. I think the program's called See Yourself in Cyber. It has aspects that are tied to MFA. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we adopted this year's Cybersecurity Awareness Month theme of See Yourself in Cyber. And that aligned very well with what we had already intended to focus on, which was multi-factor authentication. Every year in advance of October, we look at what we think are the risks that we should be addressing that are specifically human targeted and maintained risks. And so last year, Mary's team worked with us to put up a self-service security portal where each individual user at Duke can log in and can get a snapshot of their security posture based on a few different elements that are completely in their control. And so we modify this now to say, here are a few new steps that are in your control, and you can decide for yourself whether to take those steps to kind of move yourself on the bar towards the right of the most secure elements of our workforce or our population. One of those things really focuses around multi-factor authentication. And so the three elements that we're trying to drive this year are multi-factor everything. Literally any system that will allow for multi-factor, you can have it toggled so that it will multi-factor for you for that system. The second one is trying something like Duke Unlock, and Mary will explain Duke Unlock and why we feel that it's significantly better than some of the older methods of multi-factor authentication like text or telephone multi-factor. And then finally, it is opting out of those older more deprecated methods of authentication. And so around those three steps for MFA, we're trying to drive those behavior changes, but we're trying to do it in a way that allows our population to feel like they have made a choice. And we understand that there is a burden to them for those types of decisions. So helping them to choose those decisions on their own gets us faster, better buy-in. And then at some point when we hit a threshold where enough people have voluntarily chosen, we move into the stage where we say it's now more efficient for us just to say everybody has to do it because most people have already done it.
Yeah, I love that. I was just going to say the fact that there's a choice there is interesting because so much of this can sometimes involve that cultural or psychological, maybe is a better way of putting it, pushback. And so kind of, I can imagine seeing the options and taking ownership of that really having an impact on whether you got to get the buy-in that you need. So that's really interesting. I like
that.
I
think historically what you find with these types of initiatives, and we've been doing multifactorial for a long time, but we can talk about the history at some point. What you find is that if you walk in and you do a hard cut and you immediately say, we're going to go full in and all controls, you're likely to fail. And so I think that a staged, intentional, evolved over time rollout of something like this is probably setting yourself up for better success.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we found with that is that there's two things that are relevant to that that security panel and why it's been effective and why it's helped boost our metrics of adoption. One of them is that the security program adoption curve, in our experience, really follows the technology adoption curve in general. Not everyone is going to want to be the first one to try something out, but you are going to have some people who are excited to try it. Those are usually the same people who will give you feedback on it. And then after some people are doing it, other people start saying, oh, well, maybe I should get around to doing that. And then, you've got some people who are kind of at the end of that curve who, maybe we're the ones who have still held out on having smartphones, and they might need different things. They might not want to use the notification on the smartphone app that they don't have or can't do. So just kind of doing that slowly, to Shelly's point, I think has been helpful. The other thing that we found is helpful is a show, don't tell approach. Everybody's busy, everybody's inundated with information all of the time. And so when we give information that are long form security policies, which we also need to have, or even long form security guidance, a lot of times what the feedback we get from people is, okay, but what do you want me to do? Yeah. And so giving people a personalized experience where they can log in and we can say, here are all the things we would like you to do. Here are the ones you've done. Here are the ones that you're missing. Here's the link to sign up for that. And it's just a very quick digest and it's personalized to the user. We've found gives people an opportunity to say, these are the things that I don't mind doing. And maybe I'll hold out on that one. And even those metrics are valuable to us. People who work and say, I will adopt all of these recommended behaviors except one, tells us we really need to dig into that one and what is the thing that's stopping people from doing it.
Why it is viewed as an obstacle more than others is
exactly
interesting for sure. So I know Duke Unlock, which Shelly mentioned, is basically a version of passwordless authentication, which you sort of mentioned. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So Duke Unlock is a open source, we've open sourced it at Duke, implementation of WebAuthn based authentication. WebAuthn is a passwordless authentication standard that has been, broadly, it's been very cross-functional, coming out, and largely when you hear WebAuthn, which is a very technical term, you might think of the native capabilities of your phone to do like biometrics or to have a gesture that can log you into something. It doesn't always have to be biometrics, and we are completely agnostic about whether people use biometrics or not. The important thing is that it stays on your phone. It's between you and your phone. If you use Face ID because you have an iPhone, or if you use Android fingerprint because you have an Android, or if you say, I don't want my fingerprint even on my phone, I would like to disable that, you can use your PIN. And so modern authentication systems generally try to limit the exposure of your password by, rather than having every single website validate your password on your behalf, instead websites should redirect you to a central location that can validate it centrally and then send you back, seamlessly to the source. What WebAuthn allows you to do is to take that one step farther and to say, instead of delegating just to the central institutional source and all of their arbitrary ideas about what multi-factor looks like, you can actually bring your own multi-factor. And if you have a computer that has a fingerprint reader, or you use a laptop that has Windows Hello, anything, the difference is that your computer or your phone, or sometimes for people who prefer this, like a security key that meets the standards of WebAuthn, those things will all allow you to use your native device's capabilities to log in seamlessly. So logging into Duke Unlock is multi-factor, but it's really only one touch, and it's passwordless. But what we found is that the experience of logging in with just holding up my phone and using Face ID, it is multi-factor because it is not only my registered device, going back to, we've had more luck when people have one-to-one devices, we recognize that device, and the device is able to meet this common standard of saying someone else with Mary's phone can't log in as her because it wouldn't pass the Face ID check.
Yeah.
So that's something that we found is, even though it's multi-factor, it is one step. And so it's actually easier than single factor authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
And so Yeah, as a user, Mary said all the right stuff. As a user, I love just to be able to go to a site that is an authenticated site on my device, point my face at it and be in, rather than trying to type a 20+ character password into a Safari browser and then still doing multi-factor. It is really burdensome to do that. And ease of use is, and the user experience is a huge part of multi-factor, right? Getting the buy-in with the user experience is a huge part of multi-factor. And so the easier your multi-factor is, the better your adoption rates are going to be 100% of the time. Like, you're going to see a direct correlation between the user experience and your adoption rates.
Oh, yeah. And I think there's a perception of MFA that it is going to be difficult just by the nature of, I need to find multiple ways to prove who I am. So eliminating some of those systematically, I think, is enormous for adoption. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And we have seen that people who might struggle with making time and emotional and, bandwidth to go through and figure out how to do some arbitrary thing that your hospital told you to do to protect patient records. When it comes to being able to delegate that to your phone that you use every day, or your laptop's native capabilities every day, people are much more comfortable. We found that a lot of times the difference between whether you get an Android phone or an iPhone are often the security features are a big selling point. People become very attached to, I want to protect my own privacy, and I like how this provider does it versus this provider. People take the time to learn how to protect their own things. And that's something that in healthcare we can leverage and say, let's make sure that we are making sure that the security that people are already opting into and their personal devices can be invoked when we talk about this. So I think that's been a real benefit.
And you said this was open source, and I believe my alma mater took advantage. Is that right?
Yes. So I was saying that we have shared our code, and not only is Duke Unlock running at Duke, there are pilots running in many places, and down the road, UNC Chapel Hill has also launched Carolina Key, which is based on the same WebAuthn integration approach. They are keeping us very much on our toes, and it's been very exciting to see their design decisions about rollout. Anybody who would like to get in touch with us to talk about our code, we'd be happy to talk about it. But even in other contexts, I did want to mention that when it comes to applications that people use to access patient data, I think we are seeing more and more a similar approach where native applications on your phone will call out to say, make someone unlock their phone again before they go into this. That's just WebAuthn under the hood in a nutshell. And I think we will see the future of technology kind of take us in that direction, where instead of trying to ask people to do an arbitrary thing, we will leverage the increased local, platform authentication options that we're seeing on modern devices to make it more seamless to get into those things.
Yeah, I know the Face ID on my iPhone, I end up using for multiple apps, and it's hugely convenient. So,
and here's why too, Jill. I think that you've got to be able to give people the story and the picture. And so we collect metrics on a regular basis, and we're able to show how often we're attacked, and multi-factor is foiling those attempts of attack. And we are very straightforward with our population about letting them know that we rolled multi-factor out after a successful attack against us. And we use this story regularly to help people to understand we're not rolling multi-factor or doing multi-factor to harm you or to implement some arbitrary control on you. It's there to protect you. It's there protecting your salary. It's there protecting our assets. And we know we can produce the data to show to them that not just that initial successful attack, but numerous unsuccessful attacks as the result of having rolled multi-factor successfully out for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the number of universities and hospitals or healthcare providers that are getting targeted and hit, whether it be ransomware or other, it is amazing kind of the impact of these kinds of technologies, or the lack of them, without question. So. Terrific. Well, this has been great. Thank you both. I'm so thrilled that we got you, and this has been fascinating. Thank you for sharing all the work that you're doing currently. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And everybody, keep an eye out. Go back to our site. We have other videos as well. But happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we hope to see you soon.